Good morning, everyone. It's Jonathan here again. And today the passage we're going to be looking at is 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5 through to chapter 2, verse 9. Now, just before we look at the passage itself, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the context because we're right near the beginning of the epistle. You may have looked at the summary, excellent summary on Bible Project, but I'm just going to put a little bit more context in because that will help us understand this passage. As you know, a little while ago, a few months back, Paul was in Turkey, and he had this vision of a Macedonian man. So he felt the Lord was leading them to move over to Macedonia, which is in Greece today. And so they went to Philippi. And when he was in Philippi, they found some God-fearers. They preached the good news. They became believers. Everything was going quite well until they had some trouble with a fortune-telling girl. And when Paul delivered her of the spirit that controlled her, it caused a big commotion, and a mob was raised up, and he ended up getting arrested and flogged and was in prison. Of course, God intervened with the earthquake, had an encounter with the jailer. But even so, Paul still had to leave the city the next day, even if he was escorted out by the authorities who were apologetic about subjecting a Roman citizen to the treatment he had had. And that's when he comes to Thessaloniki. And so he's not in the best of shape, but he still starts off with looking for God-fearers. So he goes to the synagogue, he preaches there. A number of Jews and God-fearing Greeks come to faith, but others are jealous. And so again, they stir up a mob, and again, he has to leave after only a few weeks, possibly a month. So then he goes to Berea, which is nearby, and basically the same thing happens again. This time it's troublemakers from Thessaloniki who come over and cause trouble in Berea. And so he has to leave, and he's then escorted for his own safety down to Athens, which is further south. And when he gets there, he's a little bit concerned. He's thinking, what's happened to these believers in these places where I've had to leave because of trouble? And particularly he's concerned about those in Thessaloniki. Because he can't go himself, he sends Timothy to see how they are. And he is very much on edge, wondering if because of the opposition, it will all have fallen apart, they'll have fallen away, given up. But when Timothy comes back, he has good news. He says, it's okay, they're doing well, they're standing firm. And Paul is so overjoyed, and so he writes this epistle to them. And what we see in this passage, we see three things, and I'm just going to highlight them one by one. So the first thing is from the first verse. We see something of the message that Paul preached. It says, our gospel came to you not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit and deep conviction. Now, sometimes there's a little bit of discussion over what it means coming with power. Those from a more conservative background tend to emphasize the intrinsic power of the message of the gospel to convict. Those from a more charismatic background tend to emphasize that as well as preaching the word, people will pray for the sick or pray for those who need deliverance. I think it's quite simple. The reality is there's both. I'm sure Paul would have been relying on the power of the message of the gospel, but he also would have been praying for the sick and so on. And so they had the real message. They had the full gospel, as some people call it. The second thing that we see is it wasn't just that they preached the good news, but also they lived the life. Paul is not just there on his own. He has Silas and Timothy who co-authored the epistle with him, possibly others, and they modeled a Christ-like life among the Thessalonians. They showed love. They took care of those who, like parents, new believers, but also they worked hard. They didn't rely on others to look after them. They said, we will pull our weight. We will be responsible for looking after ourselves, as well as giving out to others. And so this life was modeled to them during that time. And the result, as we see, was that the new believers, not only did they have a real encounter with God because of the message, but they also saw how to live godly lives. And so after Paul and Silas and Timothy had left, they knew what to do. And so they became an example to those, as Paul says later in chapter 1, an example to those in Macedonia. That's the area which includes Philippi and Thessaloniki and Berea, and also in Achaia. That's the area further south in Greece where Athens and Corinth are. So just to sum up, the believers in Thessaloniki, they heard the real message, they saw the real life, and they became the real church. No wonder Paul was so thankful in this letter.